In the heart of the galaxy, where 1,000-star empires argued, traded, and threatened each other, there was a place of order. It was called the Grand Convergence. A massive structure of living crystal and dark metal floated in open space, larger than some moons. Inside it, representatives of hundreds of intelligent species gathered to decide the fate of civilizations. The Chamber of Judgment was silent. Not because it was peaceful, but because everyone was waiting. At the center of the vast hall, a holographic map of the galaxy rotated slowly. Colored regions marked the territories of dominant powers. The Corlith Dominion in crimson, the Vishari Collective in blue, the Nithar Hive in sickly green, and many more. At the outer edge of the map, barely noticeable, was a small yellow cluster of systems. That was Earth's territory. The humans. A Corlith high strategist clicked his talons against the floor in amusement. His species stood over 3 meters tall, covered in black armor-like scales, with eyes that glowed like dying stars. "So," he growled, his voice amplified across the chamber, "this is the species that disturbed the balance?" Laughter rippled through the hall in many alien forms, chittering, hissing, psychic pulses of mockery. The Vishari ambassador, a tall, elegant being of light and mist, drifted forward. "They call themselves humans. They are new. Primitive by our standards. Their ships are crude. Their weapons rely on chemical propulsion and kinetic force. They have not yet mastered phase drives or neural-linked command fleets." Another wave of amusement passed through the chamber. "They are barely out of their home system," added a Nithar observer, its insect-like body twitching. "They have no standing alliances. No ancient war doctrine. No experience with true interstellar conflict." The Corlith strategist spread his claws. "Then why are we even discussing them?" A pause followed. Then a smaller voice spoke. "They destroyed 3 Corlith patrol fleets." Silence crashed into the chamber like a shockwave. All eyes turned to the speaker, an Arcani's data archivist, a fragile species known for truth and neutrality. Its thin limbs shook slightly as it projected a holographic recording. The image showed space near a red dwarf star. Corlith warships, massive, angular, bristling with plasma cannons, moved in perfect formation. Then small, dark shapes appeared on scanners. Human ships. They were ugly by galactic standards. Boxy. Inelegant. Covered in external plating and visible weapon mounts. But they moved differently. Not in neat formations. They scattered, vanished behind asteroids, used the star's radiation to blind sensors. Then they struck. Missiles accelerated at impossible angles. Kinetic rounds pierced shields by overwhelming them with sheer mass. Human ships sacrificed themselves to open paths for others. One detonated its reactor inside a Corlith battleship. The recording ended. No one laughed now. The Corlith strategist's voice lowered. "That was unexpected." The Arcani's archivist nodded. Human losses were extreme. But their objective was achieved. The patrol zone was erased. They did not retreat. They advanced afterward. A Vishari elder shimmered nervously. "Perhaps, luck." The archivist's eyes dimmed slightly. They repeated the tactic. With variation. With improvement. The Grand Convergence chamber shifted from amusement to discomfort. The humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be slow. They were supposed to ask for protection, trade rights, or mercy. Instead, they had attacked. Far from the convergence, on the edge of human space, Admiral Elias Rourke watched the stars through the armored glass of the command bridge. His fleet was small compared to the ancient powers of the galaxy. 32 ships. Some barely older than 10 years. Some still carrying scars from rushed construction. A young officer approached. "Admiral, long-range scans confirm Corlith movement. They're gathering again." Rourke nodded slowly. "Of course they are. Sir, their fleets outnumber us 10 to 1. Rourke allowed himself a thin smile. "They always do." The bridge crew exchanged uncertain looks. Humans did not have superior technology. They did not have stronger shields. They did not have faster engines. What they had was something older than any empire. They adapted. "They think we fight like them," Rourke said calmly. "They think war is about clean victories and perfect formations." He turned to the tactical display. "We fight to survive." Human engineers had been awake for 3 days straight, modifying weapons from scrap and captured alien technology. Scientists argued, tested, failed, and tried again. Soldiers trained in zero gravity, in radiation storms, in environments no sane species would choose to fight in. Humanity did not wait for perfection. They used what worked. On the distant Corlith flagship, Commander Vrax observed the human systems with disdain. They are animals, he hissed. Their resistance is emotional, not logical. They will exhaust themselves. His second-in-command hesitated. Yet they continue to improve, Commander. Their tactics change every engagement. Instinct, Vrax replied. Not intelligence. Back at the convergence, whispers spread. Data packets moved between species. Observers began paying attention to the yellow cluster on the map. For the first time, humanity had become noticeable. On Earth, in underground command centers and orbiting stations, leaders watched reports in silence. Casualty lists were long. Resources were stretched thin. Fear existed, but it did not rule them. A scientist spoke quietly. They think we are weak because we bleed. A general answered. Every living thing bleeds. We just refuse to stop. Admiral Rourke addressed his fleet. His message was simple. They don't understand us. They never will. And that is our advantage. The human fleet moved into formation, not elegant, not perfect, but purposeful. In the vast galaxy where ancient empires ruled with confidence and tradition, a young species was writing its own doctrine. Not of dominance, not of conquest, but of survival through adaptation. And the galaxy had made its first, most dangerous mistake. It had underestimated humanity. The Corlith invasion began with confidence. Their fleets moved like a tide of black iron, hundreds of warships slipping through hyperspace corridors that had crushed lesser civilizations. Their commanders believed this campaign would be short. A correction. A reminder to the galaxy that the Corlith Dominion did not tolerate disruption from primitive species. Commander Vrax stood on the bridge of the Void Talon, watching human space grow larger on the main display. So fragile, he muttered. So small. His officers shared his certainty. They had crushed civilizations older than humanity. They had shattered empires that once spanned entire quadrants. Humans were supposed to be a lesson, not a challenge. Then the first anomaly appeared. Commander, one of the sensor officers said, mandibles tightening, long-range detection shows debris. Massive debris fields. Wreckage of Corlith origin. Vrax narrowed his glowing eyes. From the earlier patrols? No. More recent. The energy signatures are still unstable. A chill passed through the bridge. They had lost contact with 2 forward scouting fleets hours earlier. That was not supposed to happen. Even if humans won, they were supposed to be damaged, weakened, scattered. Instead, space itself told a different story. The Corlith fleet advanced cautiously now, shields raised, weapons charged. Confidence did not vanish, but it began to crack. At the edge of a human system called Helios 7, Admiral Rourke waited. The system was not important. No major colonies. No critical resources. That was why it was perfect. Human engineers had spent weeks turning Helios 7 into a trap. Mining stations became weapons platforms. Asteroids were hollowed out and packed with explosives. Old ships that could no longer fight were converted into massive remote-guided bombs. Rourke studied the display. They think we're defending, he said. We're hunting. Captain Mara Chen stood beside him. Sir, if this fails. Rourke nodded. Then we learn. And we try something worse. The human fleet did not rush forward. It vanished. Stealth systems engaged. Drives cut. Ships drifted among asteroids and radiation clouds like dead metal. When the Corlith entered Helios 7, they saw nothing. Scans are clear, reported a Corlith officer. No fleet. No resistance. Vrax sneered. They fled. That was the moment the first mining station exploded. The blast tore through a Corlith cruiser, ripping its shield apart and sending molten fragments spinning into nearby ships. Before they could recover, the asteroids began to move. Not naturally. Dozens of massive rocks accelerated, guided by hidden thrusters. They slammed into the Corlith formation with unstoppable momentum. Shields overloaded. Hulls cracked. Chaos spread. Enemy contact everywhere, a Corlith officer shouted. Then human ships emerged. Not in formation. From every direction. Missiles screamed through space. Railgun rounds punched holes through already weakened armor. Human pilots flew dangerously close, using the Corlith's own size against them. One human frigate rammed directly into a battleship's engine section, detonating both. Vrax slammed his claws against the command rail. This is madness. They are destroying themselves. Yes, replied his tactical officer quietly. But they are destroying us faster. The Corlith fought back with overwhelming firepower. Entire squadrons of human ships were erased in seconds. But for every ship lost, humans adjusted. They changed angles. They changed timing. They exploited every weakness they discovered in real time. It was not elegance. It was evolution. At the Grand Convergence, emergency sessions were called. Species that had ignored humanity now demanded data. The Arcani's archivists flooded the chamber with battle analysis. They are learning during battle, one archivist said. They modify tactics within minutes. A Vishari diplomat pulsed in alarm. No species adapts that quickly without hive minds or precognition. They have neither, the archivist replied. They have experience, and memory. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. Back at Helios 7, the Corlith began retreat protocols. Commander Vrax watched his fleet fracture. A third of his ships were gone. Another third damaged. They were supposed to be weak, he whispered. On Rourke's bridge, damage reports poured in. Human losses were brutal. More than half the fleet was destroyed or crippled. Fires burned in corridors. Medical bays overflowed. Captain Shin looked at the numbers. We can't afford these losses again. Rourke closed his eyes for a moment. We can't afford not to. The message from Helios 7 reached the galaxy within hours. Not propaganda. Raw data. The first time in modern history that a young, unaligned species had forced a Corlith fleet to retreat. Not by superior technology. Not by superior numbers. But by refusal to fight the way they were supposed to. On the Corlith homeworld, shock turned into anger. The Dominion Council demanded annihilation. Humans must be erased, one elder roared. They infect the balance of power. Another replied more quietly. They infect certainty. In human space, celebrations were muted. Victory did not feel triumphant. It felt temporary. Like standing on a cliff while an ocean gathered below. Admiral Rourke addressed Earth and the colonies. They are learning now. So must we. He paused. This was not victory. This was proof. Proof that humanity could stand. Proof that the galaxy's rules were not fixed. Proof that adaptation was a weapon. And for the first time across the stars, ancient civilizations began to feel something unfamiliar. Not anger. Not contempt. But doubt. Because the weakest species in the room was refusing to break. And that was far more dangerous than any fleet. The Grand Convergence had never been this divided. For millennia, it had been a place of order, where the oldest empires guided the younger ones and wars were controlled, predictable, almost ceremonial. Now, uncertainty rippled through its crystalline halls like a living thing. The yellow cluster on the galactic map had grown brighter. Not larger. Brighter. More data streams. More military traffic. More attention. The Arcani's archivists stood at the center, projecting the aftermath of Helios 7. Broken Corlith ships. Human wreckage. Patterns of destruction. Lines of probability shattered. The humans are not escalating randomly, an archivist said. They are experimenting. A Vishari diplomat drifted forward, light flickering nervously. Experimenting? With war? Yes, replied the archivist. They treat each battle as a lesson. Each loss as information. Each failure as a design update. A low murmur passed through the chamber. The Nithar hive speaker clicked its mandibles. That is inefficient. War should be optimized before engagement. That is impossible, the archivist answered. They optimize during engagement. The words carried a weight that no one liked. Across the chamber, the Corlith delegation radiated controlled fury. Their high strategist stepped forward. We will correct this anomaly. We will deploy a Dominion Armageddon fleet. Total erasure. Several species shifted uncomfortably. The Vishari elder spoke carefully. Total erasure risks destabilizing trade routes and regional security. The humans are contained. Contained? The strategist growled. They humiliated us. They survived you, the elder corrected. That is different. Silence followed. That distinction had never mattered before. Now it did. Meanwhile, in human space, survival had become routine. On the orbital shipyard above Earth, construction never stopped. Half-built hulls floated beside damaged ships being stripped for parts. Civilian factories were converted to military use. Old satellites were turned into sensor networks. Nothing was wasted. Admiral Rourke walked through the shipyard with engineers and scientists. They looked exhausted. And alive. We need predictive shields, one engineer said. Not stronger. Smarter. A physicist replied, we can't outmatch their energy output. But we can confuse it. How? By making our ships behave wrong. Rourke raised an eyebrow. Define wrong. Erratic energy signatures. randomized shield frequencies, drives that don't follow standard acceleration curves. Their targeting systems rely on expectation. Rourke smiled faintly. Then we will become unexpected. On a remote colony world, soldiers trained in artificial gravity storms, vacuum exposure, and electromagnetic interference. Humans adapted their own bodies to warfare the galaxy had never imagined. Alien species used specialized troops. Humans used everyone. Doctors trained with weapons. Engineers trained in combat. Pilots learned emergency medicine. Soldiers learned engineering. Humanity was becoming fluid. Not efficient, but unstoppable. Back in Corlith space, Commander Vrax stood before the Dominion Council. His armor was scorched. His voice steady but quieter than before. They are not reckless, he said. They are desperate and intelligent. The council hissed in anger. They sacrifice ships willingly, an elder said. They throw lives away. They trade lives for time, Vrax answered. And time becomes advantage. That was when the council ordered the Armageddon fleet. 5,000 warships. Ancient relics of destruction. Weapons banned by convergence law, reserved for existential threats. The message was clear. Humanity was now an existential threat. The convergence received the alert hours later. Panic followed. The Vishari protested. The humans are not a conquering empire. They are defending themselves. The Corlith strategist answered coldly. They are redefining warfare. That is conquest of the mind. The Arcani's archivists processed the data and delivered a quiet truth. Probability models show human survival at less than 12% if the Armageddon fleet is deployed. A small pause. Unless. The chamber leaned forward. Unless they adapt again. In human command, the warning came through encrypted channels. Admiral Rourke listened in silence. 5,000 ships. Earth did not have 500. Captain Chin whispered. This is extinction. Rourke replied calmly. No. This is evolution pressure. The room stared at him. They believe power is mass, he continued. We believe power is change. He turned to the tactical board. We cannot meet them head-on. So we won't. What's the plan? Chin asked. Rourke exhaled slowly. We stop thinking like a fleet. We think like a virus. Human strategy shifted overnight. Instead of gathering, they scattered. Instead of defending territory, they abandoned it. Colonies were evacuated. Infrastructure was rigged to self-destruct. Supply depots were turned into traps. Humanity became invisible. The Corlith Armageddon fleet advanced into empty systems. No resistance. No fleet. Only silence. That is impossible, Vrax muttered. They do not retreat completely. But humans were not retreating. They were dissolving. Small strike teams hit Corlith supply lines. Sabotage destroyed fuel convoys. Communication relays vanished. Logistics collapsed in tiny, painful pieces. One Corlith commander sent a message. They are not fighting us. They are dismantling us. At the convergence, fear replaced debate. The archivists showed simulations of the Armageddon fleet slowly starving, isolated, confused, turning against itself in desperation. They are using asymmetrical extinction tactics, one archivist said. The Vishari whispered. They are teaching the galaxy a new way to fight. Admiral Rourke watched reports from dozens of micro-battles. Human ships striking, vanishing, striking again. Not heroes. Not warriors. Survivors. He spoke softly to his officers. They brought gods of war. We brought chaos. The galaxy had always respected power. Now it was learning to fear intelligence under pressure. Because humanity was no longer trying to win battles. They were trying to outlast history itself. And that terrified everyone. The Corlith Armageddon fleet was built for one purpose: finality. Its ships were ancient and massive, designed in an era when wars were decided by overwhelming force and unquestioned dominance. Each vessel carried weapons capable of burning planets, breaking moons, and erasing civilizations from history. For thousands of years, its very existence had been enough to prevent rebellion. Now, it drifted through empty human systems. Commander Vrax stood on the observation deck of the flagship World Reaper. He stared at a star that once had human mining stations around it. Now there was nothing. No ships. No stations. No resistance. Only silence. They should be here, he said quietly. A tactical officer answered. All colonies evacuated. Infrastructure self-destructed. We are finding only ruins. Vrax felt something unfamiliar twist in his core. Not victory. Not satisfaction. Confusion. This was not how extinction campaigns were supposed to look. There should be screams, fleets, desperate last stands. Instead, the humans had erased themselves from his grasp. They deny us a battle, he whispered. And in doing so they denied the Corlith their greatest strength. Far behind the Armageddon fleet, Corlith supply convoys began to vanish. Fuel carriers exploded without warning. Communication arrays went dark. Navigation beacons broadcast false coordinates that sent ships drifting into gravitational hazards. The attacks were small, almost insignificant, but they never stopped. A Corlith logistics commander sent a desperate report. Enemy contact consists of single ships or pairs. They strike, disable, and vanish. No pattern. No central command detected. That sentence spread through the Dominion like a disease. No central command. No pattern. No doctrine. This was not war. It was erosion. On a human stealth carrier hidden inside a comet's hollow core, Captain Mara Chen watched strike team feeds. Team Atlas, confirmed destruction. Confirmed. Corlith fuel node is gone. We're pulling out. The humans had abandoned the idea of large fleets. They now used small, heavily modified ships that barely registered on enemy sensors. Old civilian vessels were turned into ghosts, coated in experimental absorption plating and running on unpredictable drive bursts. They did not seek victory. They sought exhaustion. A young pilot asked over comms, "Captain, are we winning?" Chin paused before answering. "We're surviving. That comes first." Back at the Grand Convergence, chaos ruled. Trade routes collapsed as Corlith supply failures rippled outward. Smaller empires that depended on Corlith protection suddenly found themselves exposed. The Vishari ambassador glowed in distress. The Armageddon fleet is destabilizing half the quadrant, and yet it is losing. The Arcani's archivist corrected gently. "It is not losing. It is bleeding." "From what?" asked a Nithar delegate. "From ghosts. From humans." Silence followed. The Convergence had no law for this kind of warfare. No clause for a species that refused to fight honorably, traditionally, or visibly. The Corlith strategist demanded escalation. "We will burn every star in their territory." The archivist responded coldly. "They have already left those stars. You will only prove their strategy effective." On Earth, Rourke studied casualty reports. Numbers climbed slowly, painfully. But Corlith losses climbed too. Not in ships. In time. In resources. In certainty. Captain Chin joined him. "They are starting to protect their supply lines with warships. Big ones." "Good," Rourke replied. "That means fewer ships hunting us." Chin hesitated. "Admiral, how far are we willing to go?" Rourke did not look up. "As far as survival requires." Human scientists unveiled a new weapon. Not a bomb. A signal. A piece of code designed to infect Corlith navigation systems, subtly altering star maps and gravitational predictions. Ships began to miscalculate jumps. Some emerged too close to stars. Others vanished into deep space. The Corlith called it a curse. The humans called it math. Commander Vrax received the reports in horror. "Our ships are being lost without combat," an officer said. "Space itself has become hostile." Vrax whispered, "No. The humans have become space." The Armageddon fleet slowed. It clustered tighter, protecting itself, turning inward. Exactly what Rourke had hoped. "They are compressing," Chin observed. "They fear isolation." "Then we give them isolation," Rourke answered. Human strike teams intensified attacks on communication relays. Entire Corlith task groups were cut off for days. When contact returned, they were paranoid, exhausted, and trigger-happy. Some fired on their own allies. The Convergence watched in horror. "They are breaking the Corlith psychologically," the Vishari said. The archivist replied. "They are rewriting what power means." For the first time in galactic history, a younger species was not trying to replace an empire. It was dismantling the idea of empire itself. On a dying Corlith carrier, Vrax watched human boarding teams breach his hull. They moved fast, coordinated, using non-standard weapons and unpredictable routes. Not conquerors. Surgeons. Cutting arteries. He activated a distress beacon. But no answer came. The Armageddon fleet, once a god of war, was now a wounded giant surrounded by invisible knives. And humanity had proven something terrifying. You did not need to be stronger than a god. You only needed to make the god bleed forever. The Armageddon fleet was no longer advancing. That alone shook the galaxy. For centuries, once it had been deployed, extinction followed. Worlds burned, resistance vanished, and the name of the target was erased from history. It had never paused, never hesitated, never slowed. Now it drifted in fractured formation, surrounded by empty stars and broken supply lines. Commander Vrax sat in the dim command chamber of the World Reaper. The great ship still lived up to its name and power, but its spirit was failing. Reports flooded in every hour. Navigation failures, fuel shortages, mutinies, sensor ghosts that drove crews to exhaustion. "They are not killing us," Vrax said quietly. "They are making us afraid to exist." His officers did not argue. They felt it too. Every jump could be their last. Every signal might be false. Every shadow might hide a human ship. The humans were everywhere. And nowhere. On Earth, Admiral Rourke addressed a joint council of military leaders, scientists, and civilian governors. The room was heavy with exhaustion. A general spoke first. "Our losses are unbearable. Our population cannot sustain this forever." Rourke nodded. "Neither can theirs." A scientist added. "They are burning fuel faster than they can replace it. Their logistics were built for domination, not uncertainty." A governor whispered. "But if we fail?" Rourke finished the sentence. "There will be no humans left to regret it." Silence settled. Then Rourke spoke again. "We are no longer defending ourselves. We are reshaping the galaxy's idea of power. That is dangerous. But it is also our only chance." Humanity had crossed a line. They were no longer just survivors. They were teachers. And the lesson was terrifying. At the Grand Convergence, emergency negotiations exploded into chaos. Smaller empires panicked. Trade coalitions demanded intervention. The Vishari pleaded for diplomacy. "We must speak to the humans," their ambassador said. "They fight like cornered beings. Cornered beings can be reasoned with." The Corlith strategist laughed bitterly. "They are not cornered. They have become the corner." The Arcani's archivists presented a projection. "If current trends continue, the Armageddon fleet will collapse within 6 standard cycles. Not from destruction but from systemic failure." The chamber fell silent. The greatest weapon in galactic history, defeated without a decisive battle. The implication was devastating. Meanwhile, Commander Vrax received a transmission. Not a threat. Not propaganda. A human voice. Clear. Calm. Unencrypted. "This is Admiral Elias Rourke of the Human Defense Coalition. We request dialogue." The bridge froze. A Corlith officer hissed. "It is a trap." Vrax considered the message. For the first time in his life he felt no certainty. "No," he said slowly. "It is confidence." Against every instinct he ordered the channel opened. Rourke's image appeared. Tired eyes. Unadorned uniform. No display of dominance. "You are dying," Rourke said simply. "But you don't have to." Vrax's claws tightened. "You threaten us while hiding like shadows?" "We fight like survivors," Rourke replied. "You fight like rulers who never expected to bleed." The words struck deeper than any weapon. "You cannot win," Vrax said. "You are too small." Rourke nodded. "Then stop making us fight." The bridge went silent. Vrax realized something terrifying. The humans were not seeking conquest. They were offering an exit. On the Convergence, news of the communication shattered expectations. "They are negotiating," the Vishari whispered. "After all this?" The archivist replied. "They are demonstrating control." Power was no longer measured by destruction. It was measured by restraint. Human strategy shifted again. Attacks slowed. Sabotage became selective. They stopped collapsing entire routes and began targeting only aggressive formations. A message was being written across the stars. "We decide how this ends." Commander Vrax faced his council. "They are not afraid of us anymore," he said. "They are afraid of what we make them become." That truth broke something ancient inside the Dominion. The Corlith had ruled through fear for generations. They had never faced a species that could inflict fear, and then choose not to. Admiral Rourke addressed humanity. "We have shown them what we can do when we are forced to survive. Now we show them who we are when we choose to live." Some wanted annihilation. Some wanted revenge. But most were simply tired. Tired of running. Tired of bleeding. Tired of proving their worth through death. The galaxy watched in disbelief as the smallest power at the table dictated terms to one of its oldest. Not with fleets. Not with threats. But with certainty. For the first time, the gods of war began to doubt their own divinity. And humanity stood before them not as conquerors, but as the species that had rewritten what supremacy truly meant. The meeting did not take place on a planet. It did not take place in the Grand Convergence either. It happened in open space, between borders, between powers, between definitions of victory and defeat. A single human ship arrived first. Small. Unarmed by galactic standards. Its transponder was open, broadcasting identity without encryption. HDC Envoy Vessel, Resolve. Then, slowly, the Corlith arrived. Not the World Reaper. Not a titan of destruction. A diplomatic cruiser, ancient and scarred, surrounded by defensive escorts that kept their weapons powered down. Across the galaxy, sensors focused on that empty region of space. For the first time in recorded history, the Armageddon fleet waited while humans spoke. Inside the human ship, Admiral Elias Rourke stood in a simple briefing room. No banners. No symbols of dominance. Just a table, a chair, and quiet resolve. Captain Marachin watched him. "You're walking into the presence of a god, sir?" Rourke shook his head. "I'm walking into the presence of a being who learned gods can bleed." The docking sequence was silent and slow. The airlock opened. Corlith guards waited, towering, armored, but tense. Commander Vrack stepped forward. He looked older than he had in battle. Less certain. Less immortal. They regarded each other for a long moment. No weapons were drawn. No threats were spoken. Vrax broke the silence. "You should be dead." Rourke answered simply. "We should be forgotten. But we adapt." They entered the chamber. The room was neutral, built to accommodate different biology. Cold light. No decorations. Just truth. Vrack spoke first. "You dismantled our greatest weapon without destroying it. Why?" Rourke folded his hands. "Because if we destroyed it, another species would build one. Fear would continue. We wanted to end the idea, not the fleet." Vrax's eyes narrowed. "You believe you can end fear?" "No," Rourke said. "But we can make fear think." That sentence echoed through Corlith space when the recording was transmitted. Vrax exhaled slowly. "You are not conquerors. That is your most dangerous trait." Rourke nodded. "We are survivors who learned how to choose." The terms were simple. And revolutionary. The Armageddon fleet would withdraw. Permanently. Its weapons would be dismantled under convergence supervision. The Corlith Dominion would recognize humanity as a sovereign equal. All aggressive expansion would halt pending galactic reform. In exchange, humanity would cease sabotage operations. They would restore navigational systems. They would share their adaptation algorithms, not their weapons but their methods. Vrax stared at the projections. "You offer us vulnerability." Rourke replied. "We offer you a future where vulnerability is not weakness." The Corlith had never accepted such a concept. They ruled because they were invincible. Humans ruled nothing. And yet, everything had changed. At the Grand Convergence, shock swept the chamber. "They are rewriting galactic law," the Vishari whispered. The Arcani's archivist spoke quietly. "They are rewriting galactic psychology." The treaty passed by narrow margin. Many species feared humans. Many feared what humans represented even more. But fear was no longer enough to deny reality. For the first time, a young species had forced reform without conquest. As the Corlith fleet began its withdrawal, human strike teams stood down. Silent ships faded back into civilian roles. Weapons platforms powered off. Sabotage codes were erased. The galaxy felt strange, quieter. On Earth, people watched the broadcasts in disbelief. No parades. No victory songs. Just relief. A child asked on a global feed, "Did we win?" An old veteran answered, "We survived. And now we get to decide what that means." Commander Vrax stood on the bridge of his ship as the Armageddon fleet turned away from human space. For the first time it felt small. Not powerless, but no longer absolute. His officer whispered, "They changed us." Vrax replied, "No. They reminded us we could change." Humanity had not defeated a fleet. They had defeated inevitability. And that terrified the galaxy more than any superweapon ever had. Because inevitability was comfort. And now nothing was guaranteed. The Grand Convergence issued a new designation. Humanity, adaptive apex species. Not strongest. Not oldest. Not most advanced. But the species that turned pressure into possibility. Admiral Rourke returned to Earth without ceremony. He stood before the planet he had almost lost. Captain Chin joined him. "Do you think they'll try again someday?" Rourke looked at the stars. "Of course. That's what living things do. And us. We'll adapt." That was humanity's promise to the universe. Not domination. Not perfection. But eternal transformation. The galaxy had held its breath. and realized it was no longer alone in shaping its own destiny. The galaxy did not return to normal. Normal had depended on certainty, on old empires, on unstoppable fleets, on the belief that power only moved in one direction, downward from the ancient to the young, from the strong to the weak. Humanity had shattered that illusion. Months after the treaty, the Armageddon fleet was no more. Its titanic vessels were dismantled in open space under Convergence oversight. Entire star systems watched as weapons that once terrified the universe were taken apart like museum relics. Not destroyed in anger, but disassembled with calm precision. Commander Vrax stood on a viewing platform as the hull of the World Reaper was cut open. The ship that had symbolized finality was now just metal and history. "They called it a god," one of his officers said quietly. Vrax answered, "No. They called it a mistake." Across the galaxy, species began to rethink everything. Military academies studied human adaptation doctrines. Political councils debated human-style flexible governance. Scientists examined how humans turned limitation into advantage. But fear followed admiration. Because if humans could reshape power once, they could do it again. On Earth, humanity was exhausted. Cities bore scars from resource shortages. Colonies were rebuilding. Entire generations had grown up in crisis mode. There was no celebration, only reconstruction. Admiral Rourke stood before the Human Defense Council for the last time. "We did not win a war," he said. "We survived an extinction. There is a difference." A council member asked, "And if they fear us now?" Rourke answered, "They feared us when we were weak. Now they respect us because we chose restraint." Captain Mara Chen was promoted, though she tried to refuse. "Heroes make targets," she said. Rourke smiled faintly. "So do survivors. We choose which one we are." At the Grand Convergence, humanity was given a permanent seat. When the human delegate entered the chamber, silence followed. Not mockery. Not disbelief. Recognition. The yellow cluster on the galactic map was no longer small or overlooked. It pulsed with activity, not expansion but connection. The Vishari ambassador spoke gently. "You have changed what it means to be powerful." The human delegate replied, "We changed what it means to be responsible." The Arcani's archivists updated their universal index. Supremacy is not permanence. Supremacy is adaptation guided by restraint. That line became law. But not everyone accepted peace. In the shadows of broken empires, extremist factions grew. Some believed the Corlith had surrendered too much. Others believed humanity had not gone far enough. Chaos was the price of transformation. One such faction attempted the unthinkable. They hijacked a partially dismantled Armageddon-class weapon, intending to prove the galaxy still needed gods of war. The alarm spread across the convergence. Panic threatened to undo everything. Humanity responded first. Not with fleets. With precision. Admiral Rourke was already retired, but Captain Chin took command. A single human task group was deployed. Small. Fast. Silent. They intercepted the rogue vessel before it could power its core. The boarding action was brutal and fast. Human teams neutralized the threat without detonating the weapon. No planets burned. No systems fell. When asked why humanity acted so quickly, Chin replied, "Because we broke that world once. We won't let anyone rebuild it." That moment became the final proof. Humanity was not dangerous because it was powerful. Humanity was powerful because it chose when not to be dangerous. Commander Vrax watched the report from Corlith space. His people had begun reforming their military, not as conquerors but as guardians. It was painful, slow, but real. "They gave us a second history," his officer said. Vrax nodded. "They forced us to earn it." Years passed. Human colonies flourished, not as fortresses but as crossroads. Trade expanded. Knowledge flowed. Humanity became known as negotiators, problem solvers, and last resort strategists when chaos threatened balance. Still, the galaxy never forgot. When war loomed between ancient powers, they asked, "What would humans do?" Not because humans were strongest, but because humans understood loss. On a quiet evening on Earth, Admiral Rourke stood watching the sky. He was older now, tired, at peace. A young cadet approached him. "Sir, were you afraid when it all began?" Rourke considered the question. "Yes," he said. "Terrified." "Then how did we win?" Rourke looked at the stars. "We didn't stop being afraid. We just refused to let fear decide who we were." The cadet nodded slowly. "That's adaptation," the cadet said. Rourke smiled. "That's humanity." Across the galaxy, historians would write, "The humans were not the strongest species. They were not the most advanced. They were not the oldest. But when the universe applied pressure, they changed shape instead of breaking. They turned desperation into strategy, weakness into unpredictability, fear into clarity. They did not conquer the galaxy. They taught it how to survive itself. And in doing so, humanity achieved something far greater than dominance. They became the species that proved supremacy is not ruling others. Supremacy is mastering who you become when everything tries to destroy you. This wasn't in the enemy's calculations, and it never would be again."